Welcome to the first panel for today, which is the Kennedy assassination and international perspective. We have had a change in the makeup of this panel. As most of you can see, we do not have, unfortunately, Peter Dale Scott. Peter Dale was regrettably and unavoidably detained. But we do have a very interesting panel for you this morning, and I think we have added some people and some information to this panel which will make it all the more interesting. Our first speaker this morning is Mr. Ian Griggs. Ian was born in England in 1939. He is a recently retired London police officer. He has been interested in the Kennedy assassination since reading Rush to Judgment in 1966. He is a member of Dallas 63, which is a British research group. He also serves on the advisory board of the JFK Resource Group here in Dallas. This is his second symposium and his fourth visit to Dallas. He just completed a book on the on the news of the Kennedy and Oswald murder, on the way that the news of the Kennedy and Oswald murders reached Britain. He has written numerous articles on the case and has been published on both sides of the Atlantic. Mr. Ian Griggs.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, it's a pleasure to be back in the United States of America. It's a pleasure to be back in Texas. Above all, it's a pleasure to be back in the city of Dallas. Unfortunately, whenever I come to Dallas, it rains. I bring English weather with me. I apologize for that. And I apologize for last year's snow. I brought that as well. When I received an invitation to sit on this panel a few months ago, it was a great honour. As far as I know, the only Brit to have been afforded this honour previously was Matthew Smith last year, the author. So if I'm number two to someone like that, I'm very happy. Initially, I was to represent Great Britain, but with the makeup of the panel, I'm now claiming to represent Europe, so I'm even more happy. Let me just go briefly over how I got into this thing. Robert's introduced me, and he's explained that 1966, Rush to Judgment, that hooked me. Going back to November the 22nd, 63, I remember where I was, what I was doing, and I remember some of it with a tinge of regret. It was a Friday evening. I was unmarried. I was still living at home with my parents. I was 23 years old. My father had come home from work and had gone to the public library to change his library books. This was a regular routine. Every other Friday he would come home, and around about 6 o'clock British time, he would go up to the library. He got up to the library. For some reason, I recall I was laying on the floor in front of the TV. I don't know why I was laying on the floor, but I was laying on the floor. I remember this vividly. And the news of the shooting of Kennedy came through at around about 7 o'clock. That would be 1 o'clock Central Standard Time, about 7 o'clock our time. And it was an incident, and it was an unpleasant incident, but it wasn't world-shattering at that stage. But half an hour later, we got the news the president is dead. This was around about 7:30. Now that was news, that was frightening, and that was, as we would say in England, that was out of order. You don't do that sort of thing. My father came home about 5 or 10 minutes later, and as a cocky 23-year-old, as he came through the door, I said, "Hey, Dad, who's the president of the USA?" And he looked at me and he said, "Oh, don't be silly, Kennedy." And I smirked, a deadly smirk, and I said, "No, it's not, it's Johnson." Now that remark was made by me on the evening of November 22nd, 63, and I've regretted it ever since. I regret ever saying those words. It was stupid, it was irreverent, and it wasn't clever. I don't share that with many people because I'm ashamed of it, but that was my initial reaction to the assassination. Shock, horror, and then a bit of cockiness, which was not right. Anyway, from that moment on, the news came across the Atlantic, minute by minute, hour by hour. There were news bulletins almost continuously. The good news, of course, is within an hour they caught the guy who did it. Great, they've got this guy. We learned that he was Lee Harvey Oswald, he was a commie, he was a loony, he was a nutcase, he'd done it all by himself, and that was it. Good, the case solved within an hour. Well done, the DPD. 2 days later, even better news. This little guy with a hat manages to get to him in the police station and blows him away. Great, justice. This is good. The script is good. That's how it hit me in England. This is how it hit almost everybody in England. I think it was probably similar in a lot of cities in this country. A few months later, there were doubts expressed in England. And in '64, the Warren Commission came out. There were a few doubts, but overall, basically, it was accepted as a magnificent piece of literature that couldn't have been bettered by William Shakespeare. Everything was there, it was complete, it was, they got it right, and that was it. Then the doubts really began, and in Britain, I think the doubts possibly began, the strong doubts began earlier than they began on this side of the Atlantic. I think a lot of you have heard of the Who Killed Kennedy Committee, which was a group of left-wing intellectuals, theatre people, arts people, politicians. Bertrand Russell was a leading light, Hugh Trevor Roper, various people who later became MPs. And they questioned this thing. They questioned the Warren Report, and they started to say, hey, this is wrong. This chap in the window didn't do it. He's been set up. He's what he says he was. He's a patsy. This went on and went on. And in 1966, Mark Lane published Rush to Judgment. Now, as you know, he was unable to find a publisher in the United States. I wonder why. He eventually published that book in England. Bodley Head published it. And it was an instant bestseller. I think I can say in my life, I've only ever worn out two things through constant use. And one was a paperback edition of Rush to Judgment, which literally fell to pieces. And the other thing I wore out through constant use was Sgt. Pepper by the Beatles. So there's a good British connection there. I've been into investigating this assassination ever since reading that book. Mark Lane owes me a lot. I've spent thousands of pounds, I've travelled thousands of miles, and I've met hundreds of fellow assassination freaks, like people like you. And I'm proud to be called a buff. That's no problem to me. I'm proud of that. After Rush to Judgment, there were other books that came out. You know the books I mean, 6 Seconds in Dallas, Buchanan's book, Epstein's books, etc., etc. But for the Brits, the next really big event was Anthony Summers' conspiracy. Now that rekindled a lot of interest in England. Although people like me had never gone away from the thing, there were people who had been into it in a big way when Rush to Judgment appeared, but then drifted out. Excuse me. Anthony Summers' book rekindled the flame. As you know, it was a best-selling hardback, best-selling paperback. He reissued it a few years later, made some more money. But I'm very, very proud that Anthony Summers is a fellow Brit. He lives in Ireland. He's approachable. We can telephone him, we write to him, we get answers, and as you all know, he's a leading author on this subject. The next main event, obviously, is Oliver Stone's film, JFK. It had much the same impact in Britain as it had over here. Even before the film was finished, we were being told, this is nonsense, this is, the man is taking liberties with facts, don't go to this film, leave it alone. Exactly the same as over here. Now, that was the best thing that could have happened to that film in England. We all flocked to see it. And it brought a lot of people back into this investigation, and it brought, more importantly, brought a lot of new people into it, particularly new young people. As a result of that film, I think it was a result of that, our group in Britain, Dallas 63, was formed. Now, we'd never had a research group in GB before, and the group began basically just by 4 young men in Liverpool, back to Beetleland, 4 young men in Liverpool sitting around a table one night with a few bottles of beer and talking about the assassination. And from that, 2 years ago, just over 2 years ago, we've grown now to a national, indeed an international group of over 100 people. And those people include men, women, boys, girls, intellectuals, people who are unemployed, people who are retired, people from the medical profession, the police profession, the teaching profession, and we have a very wide range of types of people, and above all we have a very wide range of interests. I have certain interest in the case above others, and other people have their own specialities. We have regular meetings in Liverpool every month, which are attended by up to 30 or 40 people. I have now begun to run meetings in the London area every 2 months, and we invite guest speakers. We've had Matthew Smith. We're hoping for Tony Summers to appear and speak to us. Most of our speakers are from our own ranks. We have 1 or 2 very, very thorough researchers and authors. Well, I hope we've got more than 1 or 2. I hope we've got several. Several of us, including myself, have been honoured by having our work published in this country. There have been articles in Dateline Dallas, articles in Fourth Decade, and we're proud to contribute to this, to the writing that's being produced on the subject. What's pleased us more than anything is the fact that we've been accepted. We've been accepted by you. It's an honour to us that we're not looked upon as a bunch of ignorant upstarts from across the pond who are delving into something that doesn't concern us. This does concern us. He was your president. I can't claim he was my president, much as I'd like to. He was your president, but he was a man of the world. And every citizen in the world, on both sides of what was then the Iron Curtain, were affected when those shots were fired in this city in '63. As I say, our group has grown to 100 people. Last year, for the 30th anniversary here, I think there were about 12, maybe more Brits here. This year, unfortunately, due to the distance to be travelled, the finances, I think there are only about 6 or 8 of us. You've no doubt seen us. We're flying around, floating around. We're asking questions. We're showing off our British accents, and we welcome you coming in to talk to us. But please stop calling us all Australians. I mean, I keep telling people we don't have accents. You're the people with the accents. We don't have accents. As Robert said in the intro, this is my 4th visit to Dallas. I retired from a 22-year police career in May of this year, and since May of this year, this is my 4th trip to the States. Now, I can't make too many more. I'm running out of money, but it's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to be in Dallas. It's a pleasure to meet new people. It's a pleasure to say hello to the old people. I'm a member of the advisory board on the JFK Resource Group. I was very, very close to Larry Howard. I'm very pleased to see Darryl in the audience today. Thanks, Darryl. I was mixed up with the trip to Kansas City last month, which was an honour for me. And it was an honour to share a panel such as this with people like Marina Oswald and Beverly Oliver, Ed Hoffman, Craig Roberts and Jack White. And when I sat on that panel, that's the first time I've ever sat on a panel. This is the second. And when I sat on that panel, I knew I'd arrived and I'd been accepted and people knew me and respected me, and that was a tremendous kick for me. Kansas City was an eye-opener for me. I sat here, I fielded questions, answered questions, and I was amazed at the depth of knowledge that some of those kids had in Kansas City. We were aiming at high school kids, and perhaps the attendances weren't as great as we'd anticipated and hoped for, but the people who came were knowledgeable, they were inquisitive, they were intelligent, and most of them were under 20 years old. Now that's the way this thing has got to go. We've got to bring the youth of the country into this investigation so that when we are gone, there's another generation to follow on and maybe solve this thing. Even better than that would be if we can solve the thing before that, and it's not necessary for a third, a fourth, fifth generation of researchers to be born. But that's perhaps wishful thinking. Let me just go through one or two other little pieces of personal experience. I was very lucky last year in that I acquired the 26 volumes. There are very few sets on the other side of the pond. They're in libraries, they're in museums, there are very, very few in private hands. I was able to purchase a set last year thanks to people at the old AIC, Larry Howard, etc. And when I came over in November, there they were. They're my set of 26 volumes. Cost me an arm and a leg, but there they are. They were mine. Problem, get them across the pond. I'm sure there are people in this audience who've got those 26 volumes at home. They weigh 55 pounds. That's half a hundredweight. And I took those books on the aircraft as hand luggage, as carry-on luggage. I already had 2 suitcases full of the products of the last hurrah bookshop. So I bought a golf bag, and I put these 26 volumes in this golf bag, and I walked on the plane like this. That was step 1. That was negotiated. Then came step 2. You're supposed to put your luggage either under the seat in front of you, next to the bag like this, or in the overhead locker. And I found some poor unsuspecting guy. Could you give me a hand with my bag? Sure. I think it was the only American Airlines flight last year when 2 passengers got hernias on the flight. I got the books back. I made it known through the members of our research group that I had them, and my phone has not stopped ringing. I get telephone calls almost every day, and I welcome them, and it's very, very encouraging that the people in Britain are researching, and they're researching deeply enough to need references from the 26 volumes. And all I need is a volume number and a page number or a subject, and I'll either ring them back or I photocopy pages. And this is perhaps an illustration that research is continuing over there in this way. I can personally vouch for it. This is a very tenuous British connection here I'm going to tell you about. This goes back to last year, and Larry Howard. Larry had been showing me the Mannlicher Cockaigne rifle that he had in the AIC. I don't know why, as far as I'm concerned, there was no Mannlicher Cockaigne rifle involved in this assassination, but there we are. I'd become quite happy handling the weapon, playing around with it, and best of all, Larry trusted me with it. And one day Larry was in his office, very, very busy, and a group of Brazilian TV guys arrived, a team of 4 with an interpreter, an American interpreter. And they wanted to borrow the Mannlicher and go up to the 6th floor of the school book depository and hang out of the window with this thing and see what the trajectories were and pretend to fire it. Now that was okay as far as the rifle went, and Larry was very busy, and Larry gave me the rifle and he said, look, will you go with these people, look after this gun, give them any assistance you can? And I said, okay, sure. Now I was under the impression that they'd got prior permission from the 6th floor people. Anyway, we went in the main entrance to the steps, and I had this Mannlicher Cockaigne rifle wrapped in a curtain.
Curtain rods.
Hal Verb will back this story up. He was with me, and between walking from the AIC to the book depository, the curtain had sort of the back end of this gun was poking out the back end of this curtain. I marched up the steps of the TSBD, and the chap in there, wow, he said, what have you got there? And I said, it's exactly what you think it is. And he said, didn't you read the notice on the door as you came in? And I said, look, I'm sorry, I'm an ignorant Brit. I can't understand your accent, I can't read notices. He showed me the notice, no weapons or explosives to be brought into this building. I thought, gosh, that should have been here 30 years ago. Anyway, my Brazilian companions said, look, we'll try and make arrangements with the people upstairs, but we can't bring the gun in, but we'll try and do something. So I then said, okay, I'm going to the coffee shop across the road. So I take my Mannlicher out of the book depository and go into the Daltex building. I believe that the only other person who's done this is a fellow Brit called Gary Oldman during the making of JFK movie when he played Oswald. And this is a story I tell whenever I speak in England. It always brings a chuckle, because although this is a serious subject, indeed a deadly serious subject, we've got to look at a light side occasionally. Even in the darkest and blackest Shakespearean tragedy, there is always a spell where there's a little bit of humour. And this is my little contribution. Have I got very much longer, Robert, or are you going to kick me off?
About 10 minutes.
Give me another few minutes. Right. As a result of my frequent visits to America, to the States, I've drawn the attention of one or two people. Why is it that nobody can send me a parcel from America to England without it mysteriously bursting open and then being resealed before I get it? Why is that? Why do we need to put return addresses on envelopes? I wrote to a researcher 2 months ago, and unbeknown to me, he'd moved. He had his address on the front, my address on the back, a sealed letter. Somewhere, someone, now I don't know if it was the US Postal Services or the British Postal Services, someone somewhere couldn't see this return address on the back and had to open it up. Now I don't know whether they're opening my mail or opening his mail, but why is this? Anyone tell me? Burt Lancaster has recently died, film actor. My favourite Burt Lancaster film was Executive Action. You all know the film, you all know the content. Why is that video banned in my country? Why can I not go into a video store and get Executive Action? Anyone got any ideas? It kills me. I love the film. I bought a copy over here. I play it at home, and every time I play that video, I think this is close to what happened. The thing was made years ago. It was the last film that Robert Ryan ever made, so it's an important film to the film people. It now becomes one of the late Burt Lancaster's films, but it's not mentioned in any of his obituaries. The man made 70 films. Maybe it wasn't one of his major films, but I can't find an obituary to Burt Lancaster where that film is even mentioned. I understand from people I've spoken to here this week that Burt Lancaster would not take part in a film unless he believed in it and believed in its content and its object. But he performed in that film. In fact, he played the lead in that film. Things like this worry me. Things like this worry people across the Atlantic. The question I'm asked, and I've been asked it again this week, is why are you interested in the Kennedy assassination? Why is there such interest in Europe? And my answer is, it's a remark that I heard from Americans last year, and I heard Americans say, it happened in 1963, we're frightened it could happen in 1993. I can understand that. And I can twist that round slightly to my point of view, and I can say, it happened in Dallas, could it happen in London? Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being a good audience. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks very much, Ian. Our next panelist this morning is Al Navis. Al has been involved in researching the assassination since 1965. He has appeared on hundreds of radio and television programs over the past 25 years. His articles on the case have been published in various magazines, including Maclean's, Star Week, Video Mon Amour, and the Toronto Star, which is Canada's largest circulation newspaper. At present, he owns Allmark and Company Booksellers, a mail-order book service in Thornhill, Ontario, which is a suburb of Toronto. Mr. Navis.
Thank you, Robert. I'm a little bit nonplussed with Ian's remarks, as he's taken most of my jokes, and oh well.
I don't believe that.
Well, I'm basically entitling this How a Canadian Assassination Researcher Became a Bookseller, or vice versa. I was almost 12 on the day that Kennedy was assassinated, and like most Americans and indeed most citizens of the world, was shocked, horrified, and indelibly imprinted by the shooting. On Sunday the 24th of November 1963, again like most Americans, I was sitting transfixed in front of our brand new RCA color television, watching, mostly in black and white, the procession of the President's body from the White House to the Capitol Rotunda for public viewing. When ABC cut to Dallas to televise the transfer of Lee Harvey Oswald from the Dallas City Jail to the county jail, I witnessed my first live killing. This oxymoron began for me a journey which has lasted 31 years at last count, and has taken me all over the United States and Canada in search of Excalibur. For when Lee Oswald was shot that Sunday morning 31 years ago, little did Americans realize that far from closing the case with a solid pox on Gerald Posner, it rendered insoluble the crime of the century. As the network began replaying the shooting over that day, I remarked to my brother, then 23 years old, that the guy who shot Oswald looked like Al Capone. My brother thought Oswald got what he deserved, and so did most Americans. A voracious reader, I quickly inhaled anything on the assassination which I could find, newspaper and magazine articles, memorial tributes, even records. Then in February of 1964, when I was in downtown Toronto on a Saturday to buy a record by a group called the Beatles, I passed the bookstore which had a small book on the assassination in their front window. The title was Red Roses from Texas. The publisher was Frederick Miller of London, and the author was a French journalist, Narin E. Gunn, who had the original Les Roses Rouges de Dallas translated into English. It cost $3.25 in Canada because it was a hardcover in the days of when paperbacks were still 35 cents. So I went in and asked them if they'd reserve a copy until next Saturday, which they did. And when I finally bought it and got it home, I devoured it on Sunday afternoon. After all, Saturday night was reserved for hockey night in Canada, which is sacred. I telephoned the bookstore after school on Monday and asked that I be notified when any other books on the assassination arrived. 3 months later, in May of 1964, I had a message from the store informing me that they indeed did have a new book on the assassination. It was called by the highly imaginative title, Who Killed Kennedy, by Thomas G. Buchanan, who was an American political correspondent then employed in Paris by the General Organization Company at work at computerizing Paris's accounting records. Buchanan had also covered the trial of Jack Ruby for the French weekly L'Express, who published a series of his articles. When Martin Secker and Warburg, the British publishers, released the book, it caused an immediate sensation for its anti-lone nut conclusions. Il Mattino, the Italian newspaper, reviewed the Italian version of the book and said, quote, "A fascinating book embodying the product of a private investigation conducted in the face of countless obstacles and carried out with the most scrupulous attention and insight," unquote. That review was very typical of how the European press and the European people looked at the killing of John Kennedy. Very few bought the one lone nut who killed the one lone nut who killed Kennedy theory, which was being leaked from the Warren Commission hearings to the major American media. In Europe, political assassination was usually the result of a conspiracy, and most probably an inside job. Soon, more books and a flood of magazine articles and essays began to surface, and many from, as Ian says, across the pond. Buchanan wrote an article, The Rights of Man and Death in Dallas, for the Belgrade Yugoslavia magazine Delo in February 1964. Hungarian Lajos Kodalovsky wrote Thoughts on the Background to the Assassination in May of 1964. Kai Hermann wrote Who Murdered Kennedy in the Hamburg, Germany periodical Die Zeit in July 1964. Danish author Ida Bachmann wrote Who Murdered President Kennedy, a defense of Oswald's identification for the Copenhagen periodical Frit Danmark. Leo Sauvage took time away from writing his own book, L'Affaire Oswald, Réponse au Rapport Warren, published later in the United States as The Oswald Affair, an examination of the contradictions and omissions of the Warren Report, to write an article on Thomas Buchanan called Thomas Buchanan Detective for the Copenhagen, Denmark magazine Perspektiv til Dansken magazine late in 1964. Sauvage was also a regular contributor to articles critical of the official findings to the American magazine National Guardian. Well-known and respected German author Hans Haber wrote Half of the Truth, The Murderer Identified, the Murder Unexplained, for the Zurich periodical Weltwoche in late 1964. A not accredited article in December 1964 Sarajevo, Yugoslavia magazine asked, "Did the police kill Kennedy?" And even Englishmen such as Lord Patrick Devlin wrote in the New Statesman an article in early 1965 titled, "Was Oswald Guilty?" And humorist, author, and actor Malcolm Muggeridge wrote, "A New Kennedy Theory. Oswald was a double agent for the FBI, CIA, and the KGB," for that same magazine. Then came the books. Oswald the Truth by Joachim Josten, a German-born war correspondent and author. Although an American citizen since 1948, Josten nonetheless gave Newsweek readers the benefit of his European background, attitudes, and sensibilities in both his reportage and his books. In the Moscow periodical New Times, an article by Vladimir Berezhikov titled "More Light on the Kennedy Assassination" positively reviewed the Josten book in October of 1966. Josten's most famous book on the case is arguably Oswald, Assassin or Fall Guy, published in 1964 with the dedication to Mark Lane, whose brief for Oswald, published in the December 1963 issue of National Guardian, seemed to be the sole domestic dissent excuse me, against the ever-growing juggernaut of the Warren Commission. It was these foreign authors and columnists, along with a small handful of American dissenters like Mark Lane and Penn Jones Jr., Harold Weisberg, Sylvia Marr, Josiah Tink Thompson, Paris Flamond, and Edward J. Epstein, who captured my interest in beginning my own research into the Kennedy assassination. So during the summer of 1965, at the ripe old age of 13 and a half, I began to correspond with these authors as well as people in the Dallas area who had witnessed the shooting or were in other ways connected with the case. By using the Warren Commission's 26-volume exhibits and testimonies, I was able to track down and interview by mail most, if not all, of the people listed in those volumes. I would go into my father's office on the weekends and, using his secretary's brand new IBM Selectric typewriter, would ask questions of these people. Since he was in the printing business, my father had supplied me with both letterhead and envelopes so as not to disclose my less than advanced age. On the whole, these people were more than cooperative with me, probably because I never asked them more than 2 questions per letter, and if they said a subject was closed, then I wouldn't pursue it. They also seemed more at ease discussing the case and their involvement in it with someone outside the United States, maybe because I was beyond FBI influence, or so they thought. The most compelling correspondence I had was with Lee Bowers, who, as you may remember, was at the time of the assassination working as a tower controller for the Union Terminal Railroad. I had asked Lee to tell me what he saw behind the stockade fence from his vantage point on the 2nd floor of the tower building. And he said, quote, "I'm going to tell you something that I haven't told anyone else. I'll tell you this because you're up there in Canada away from their influence. They can't get to you. I'm scared that if what I really saw ever becomes public, they're going to get to me." About 3 or 4 minutes before the president's car came through, I saw 2 men about 10 feet from the corner of the fence. One was wearing almost what looked like a police uniform, and he had a rifle. I saw him shoot at the president's car. I was so scared that I told nobody what I really saw. I think I told Mark Lane that something caught my eye, but I was so scared if I told him what I really saw, then he'd print it, and I'd be dead. They'd get me, and I'm sure of it, end quote. When I read these words from Lee Bowers, I immediately wrote back assuring him that I would never put him in danger by publishing anything. We kept up our correspondence for about a year, then nothing. About 2 months after his last letter in August of 1966, I received a short note from Lee's brother, who said that Lee had been killed in an auto accident and that he was clearing out Lee's things and came across my letters, so he thought that I should know. I wrote back asking about the circumstances of Lee's death, and he said that Lee disappeared for almost a week. And when he returned, he had a bandage on the end of one of his fingers. It was now shorter than the others. Lee said that he had an accident and lost the end of the finger and that he didn't want to discuss it. His brother noticed that Lee was very nervous, almost paranoid, and that he said someone was after him. Less than 1 week later, Lee Bowers was dead. Was Lee Bowers silenced? Was he captured? Was he tortured? Who knows? All I know is that he was so concerned that they, whoever they were, would get him if his testimony, his actual testimony, was ever made public. Most of my research took place from 1965 until 1973, and most of it was centered here in Dallas. One thing I noticed when interviewing people who were here in Dallas before the assassination is that there were an inordinate number of $100 bills floating around the Dallas area. Now, in 1963, $100 bills were rather scarce. You have to remember the Chevrolet cost $2,500 in 1963, whereas now it costs $25,000. So how many $1,000 bills do you see? One fellow told me of an occurrence which happened to him before the president's visit. I'll let him tell it in his own words. Quote, "One morning, I can't remember exactly what the date was, but it was around Halloween. I was walking west on Main Street, and I came to the corner of Main and Lamar. I was waiting for the light to change so I could cross the street when a guy comes up to me and says, 'How'd you like to make a quick 100?' I asked him how illegal the thing was he wanted me to do. He said it wasn't illegal at all, but that he couldn't do it himself, so I said, 'All right, what do you want me to do?' So he gave me the address of a restaurant and told me to go there that day at 12:30. In the back left booth would be a woman sitting by herself wearing a red hat. I should go up to her and say, 'My, it sure is warm out today, isn't it?' Then I should go across the street and he would give me $100. Well, I thought, I can sure use the 100 and it doesn't sound too dangerous, so what the hell, I told him okay. So at 12:30, I walk into this restaurant, and sure enough, in the back left booth is this woman wearing a red hat. I go up to her and say the line. She nods. I leave. Across the street, when I come out of the restaurant, is this guy. I go to him, and he gives me a $100 bill. Well, the first thing I do is go to the bank to see if it was good. It was, and I asked the teller to break it into 10s and 20s. End quote. Was this how the committee would communicate down through the ranks so as not to have direct links between levels? That was my guess, and when I mentioned this to Penn Jones in the late 60s, he agreed. Penn Jones called me in 1970 and told me about a book called Farewell America. He said, try and get a copy up there in Canada or in England because they weren't letting the book into the U.S. So I contacted Foyle's Bookshop in London and asked them to search for the book for me. About a month later, I got a note from the store saying they'd found a copy, and I ordered it. When it finally arrived, it took almost 4 days for me to read and reread the book. With all due respect, the prose is even less readable than Harold Weisberg. But the content blew me away. I immediately began to research the book, asking around if other researchers had read it. I even contacted persons inside the Robert Kennedy circle for their take on the book. From 2 different sources within the Robert Kennedy camp, which I still protect to this day, I found out the genesis of Farewell America. It started almost immediately after the assassination of the president when Robert Kennedy asked family friend Daniel Patrick Moynihan to find the answers to 2 questions which were bothering him. First, was Jimmy Hoffa involved in the murder of the president? Second, were the Secret Service paid off? Moynihan very quietly assembled a staff and began a private and discreet investigation to answer Robert Kennedy's questions. In mid-January of 1964 came a confidential report. The answers were no and no. but the report was very critical of the Secret Service's performance. Yet Robert Kennedy was not fully satisfied. He felt that there was more to it than that. Through personal friendships overseas, he was able to silently recruit 2 retired assets from French intelligence. They, in turn, elicited the assistance of a retired British MI6 agent. Together, through long-time intelligence contacts, this privately financed team was able to ferret out information which was off-limits to regular researchers. While other researchers were trying to get in through the front doors of the CIA, the Pentagon, and the FBI, they were using contacts developed over many years of espionage and covert activities against the Soviets. In short, they were able to get in through the back door. When their investigation was completed at the end of 1966, they asked a French journalist named Hervé Lamar to assemble their notes, interviews, and report and put it into a more readable form. This they submitted to Robert Kennedy, and as you can see how Kennedy is transformed from being the senator from New York to a potential presidential candidate. But Kennedy makes a critical and unfortunately fatal error during the California primary. When asked a question by a Berkeley student reporter if, when he is elected, will he open the files, Kennedy replies that only the president can open those files, smiles at the reporter, and tells him that he will be president. By publicly stating his intentions to reopen the investigation into his brother's murder, Robert Kennedy sealed his own fate. The committee, cognizant of the fact of their vulnerability with another Kennedy in the White House, mobilized yet another hit team, this time using the more recently perfected mind control gambit. After Robert Kennedy's assassination on the 5th of June and his death the next day, Hervé Lamar and his group were now without their chief sponsor. They decided to try to get Farewell America published as a book. They approached major New York publishers such as Holt Reinhardt Winston, Random House, Simon & Schuster, and Alfred A. Knopf, among others. No publisher would touch the book. It was far too controversial a subject, and their stance was even more contentious than anything before. There is a line at the back of Farewell America which states, quote, "We challenge the individuals whose names are cited in this book to sue us for libel," end quote. Now imagine for a moment, if you will, you're a corporate lawyer for a publishing company, and you see this citation at the back of a book your firm is considering publishing. I would guess your vote would be no. The same negative responses came from the usually more liberal British publishing firms who had already placed many of the earlier researchers' ideas in front of the people. So Lamar and the group then decided to have the book first released in French. It was an immediate bestseller. It was then translated into Italian and then into German. A similar response came from both countries. With the proceeds from these editions, they had 10,000 copies printed in English. These copies were printed in Belgium, even though the firm they created, Frontiers Publishing, was incorporated in Vaduz, Liechtenstein. To make it more complicated, the legal address of Frontiers was a law firm in Geneva, Switzerland, and the editorial offices were Hervé Lamar's office in Paris, France. Lamar had also created a pseudonym, a nom de plume, as the author of Farewell America, one James Hepburn. The name came from Lamar's abiding love for the actress Audrey Hepburn, and the James came from the French word for I love, which is j'aime. He even created a false biography on the rear flap of the book's dust jacket. 4,000 of these copies were shipped to Manchester, England for distribution throughout Britain, and the other 6,000 copies were sent to Montreal for North American distribution. After about 2,000 of the North American copies had been distributed, the United States government, most probably the FBI, asked my government, the Canadian government, most probably the Ministry of Customs and Immigration, to find a way to capture the shipment to prevent further copies from being sent into the United States. This was accomplished by imposing a retroactive duty on the original shipment from Belgium, and then confiscating the shipment for non-payment of that duty. Nice scam. But what it did accomplish was to staunch the flow of Farewell America into the United States from Canada. In 1985, for reasons still unclear to me, the remaining copies of Farewell America were sold en masse by the Canadian government at auction. My own theory is that every business once a year has to do stock taking. and usually every employee pitches in to help. Whoever was assigned to enumerate that particular aisle would have come across a skid of books. They probably didn't even make note of what the title was, so they were placed up for auction. An interesting sidebar to this story occurred in 1967 during the Garrison investigation of Clay Shaw's involvement in the assassination. A phone call to the district attorney's office in New Orleans from someone saying he was a representative of Frontiers Publishing and that they had a work in progress on the Kennedy assassination, and would he be interested in receiving galley proofs? After the package arrived in New Orleans, you could see the Garrison investigation rapidly accelerate forward. He realized that he was indeed on the right track. What he didn't realize was the federal government would not allow the investigation to continue unobstructed. They placed roadblocks in front of Garrison at every turn. His trial was a failure not because of his incompetence, but more because of the federal government's intrusive torpedoing of witnesses. Farewell America made me realize that the lines of research I was uncovering were parallel with many other researchers. I began to concentrate on formulating a plausible scenario for both the conspiracy committee's makeup as well as the events in Dealey Plaza. It is that scenario which I have developed by believing the early witnesses and by disbelieving those people associated in any way with the United States government. After all, who has more to protect his job, a doctor in Parkland Hospital or a Navy pathologist in Bethesda? The answer is all too obvious. My scenario will be published as a book entitled Evidence of Things Not Seen as soon as the manuscript is completed. I only hope that I do not have the same problem getting published that Farewell America did. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Al. Our next speaker this morning is Sir Frank Nzeagor from Nigeria. He is based here in the United States. Frank was the owner of the Golden Egg Restaurant and the People's Restaurant, all of which were here in Texas, and he has been with world politics for the past 20 years. He is now writing a book on politics of the Third World, and he is the founder and president of a nonprofit organization called Christ of Mercy, which has been reaching out to hundreds of homeless and less fortunates in and around the Dallas Metroplex. Frank.
Good morning, distinguished and patriotic citizen. I am very privileged to be in your midst this morning. I was highly interested when I was asked if I can, have some speak on this matter. This has been almost 31 years. It has been almost 31 years of the incident, but to most of us, it still have, do as if it was yesterday. I could remember very well where I was and what happened the day I had the news. I was 14 years by then, and my first year in junior high back in Nigeria. When the news came, it was a big shock to the whole nation. Nigeria being only 3 years old then after getting their independence from Britain in 1960. The media wasn't all that strong. And the newspaper we had that time was the West African Pilot, which happens to flash the news. It has a very great impact in Nigerian government then. We shut schools, all schools were closed for one day. We had a lot of Roman Catholic churches had a special mass for him, a requiem mass in which some of them have a mock coffin covered with American flags, sit and was praying. They had a vigil for him. It gives me pleasure really seeing what has been going on for the past few days here. That some people can travel from all parts of this country to attend this. But I, for one, it gives me a very great hope. Because the killing of Kennedy has been a very great impact in most Nigerians, so to say. We had about one or two of his words that is, every father would like to pass to the child or the son or the daughter. That is where he said, think of what you can do for your country, not what your country can do for you. It has been a very great aspiration for us with that word. I know with that word, every time I remember it, it's still as new as ever. And that gave me the hope and the faith to push ahead and to think, what can I do? The extra miles that I can give. In generally, Nigerians looked at that assassination as a big blow to the whole world, not only in America, but the whole world. Like I said before, I was just 14 then. And from that, I know that really one can, focus his attention on what to be in future, what to be when he's grown up, the type of life you can do to reach out to people. The Kennedy assassination is something that, I can remember in 1967, 4 years after his death, Nigeria happens to get a civil war, which was very bloody. And most of the Christians then, the Roman Catholics, so to say, all their hope was, God will forgive people who killed Kennedy. During the war, they were saying this, they were praying that those people who plot against him, God won't forgive them. Because we felt that then that had he been in power, there must be some changes in the genocidal war going on in Nigeria then. And most of us who survived the war took it upon ourselves that, we will surely make a way to come to U.S. or to better our life or our community, for our communities. I came to this country and finished my schooling and get into business. And all along, I didn't know that really there is an organization like this. The first time I came here to Dallas, that was my goal, just to go and see the place and to go and, see what Dallas is made up of. Because before coming to U.S., what we had there is Texas is a cowboy state. Most of us in then high school and this, some of us picked the nickname Texas. Some answer Dallas, something to show that you're tough. We use it as tough names. But coming to Dallas, I found out really that Dallas is a peaceful place. And it's one of the best states I would like. I'm not saying this because I'm living here. But I strongly believe, like any other state, Dallas is good, despite the fact that it happened here in Dallas. When we were about coming here, a lot of my friends advised me, are you going to Texas, to Dallas? You must be out of your mind. I looked at it, I said, well, I would like to, he said, no, why not try other states? Because back there we don't know the difference really. He said, why not try something like New York, California? So I said, no, I will go to Dallas. And they said, going to Dallas? You're not even talking of Texas, but Dallas. Well, we will just say requirements before you leave. So, but all the same, I'm happy seeing the organization waxing strong. And I strongly believe that this might be the starting. Before you know it, it might be internationally. Because I know actually back home, some people are still eager, despite the fact that we don't have the access and the means to communicate or to find out certain things. And third world country, the way they do their politics is quite different from here. We have some writers like Wole Soyinka and Chino Achebe and others who will like to follow the issue. But back home, the government won't give them that power. And the government won't, like them to do that because really third world politics, they like to conceal everything within the so-called high-ups. But if the chance is given, yeah, I know many people who will like to be members of this organization back home. I know many writers who will like to write what they've seen. Some of my seniors then who has been following this back in Nigeria, but they don't have the access and the means to put up their books, which, some of them have visited here many a times and went back, but over there they can't put the books out. I will again seize this opportunity to, congratulate you patriotic citizens who has been standing firm on this. And we are not really doing it purely for the Kennedys, but for the entire world. Let us focus ourselves that way. This is something we are trying to prove the world that we are still interested. We want to know and we want to, find out a solution. It didn't happen only here. Nigeria in 1966, what led to the civil war they had? They assassinated the president. Then that is 3-4 years after that of Kennedy. They did the same to Nigeria. But being a third world country, it wasn't all that, a big deal. And not only being a big deal, but that one was a political motivation. And on the assassination, they assassinated a president and took over the post. Quite unlike, what could happen here that the 2IC will take over. So in most cases, I will advise, or I will suggest, the organization to, start considering extending this power to other parts of the world. We are interested, we are, we need that assistance, we need that help. A major part in life is I like to be within the patriotic people, within people who understands that this life is just nothing. And you are made up of what you are, not what you have. And this has shown me, you distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I'm happy looking to your faces. I don't know how to congratulate you all. May the Almighty God bless you all. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Frank. We are going to take a short break right now, 15 minutes until 10:30, at which time we will come back and hear from Mr. John Newman.